Hey guys, and welcome back to another Parliament Games video. My name is Adam. You guys have probably seen me in a couple of videos or shorts, but today we're doing a new series. So let me know down below if you like this. This is going to be called our Retro Runback. I'm going to go over some sets, or not sets, but decks from older formats, and we're going to start with 2010. This is one of the most popular formats in all of Retro. Actually, personally, this is when me and everybody for the store almost started, and I can remember playing when these cards were things that were brand new products. But we're gonna start from the top, and this is 2010 DialgaCHOMP, and what I've kind of called modern retro. Personally, this list is pulled off from Snowpoint Temple. This is Drew Allen's DialgaCHOMP list, and we're gonna go over a few talking points for it. So sit back, relax, and just listen to the wonderful sound of my voice. All right, so at the top of this is Dialga G. Dialga G is actually the front runner for the deck. A long time ago, Garchomp was the tried and true, probably most powerful card in the format by some standards, or most. Over the years, and I mean it's been 12 years now, Dialga G Level X has actually kind of become the front runner for here. It Deafen started to evolve over time to be the primary attack. Well, obviously it was important back then. Not gonna say it wasn't, but DialgaCHOMP was considered something of a like tier 1.5. It just wasn't. It wasn't as high up on the radar. Although it was in maybe a 1-1 line in most people's LuxChomps list, the deck just when it's got pressed against the test of time, it has started to grind out and become the front runner for the format, tied with something that was also made later along, which was GGAMU. There's the modern version of good old-fashioned Gallade Gardevoir. But some modern adaptations we've made would be the 2-2 Dialga and 2-2 Garchomp Level X in the deck. The adaptations made for this reason were, back then we used to run 3-1s in regards to the basics, but Azelf over the years became somewhat of a liability, because if one of your level X's was prized, it made it so that things just became difficult, and then your opponent could easily read when you had to search for that Azelf. When you put it on your bench, it now then suddenly becomes something your opponent can spray, or it makes it hard for you to search because you can't use SP Radar for it. Like, if you look at this list, the only ways to find it are Pokemon Communication, Collector, and Bebe Search, obviously in Roseanne's. But requiring to use a card specifically to find Azelf rather than just already have something in your hand, it just never added up. But that's what we learned. So, moving on, we have 2 Uxie and 1 Uxie Level X. It's always worth a spot in this deck, just because of Uxie Level X's. I mean, there's not a bad thing about this set of cards, truthfully, other than the price right now. I'll get on that later. Zenblade for 60 for 2 colorless. Trade, setup, the retreat cost, and I mean, you name it. This is one of those cards that Pokemon could not make almost better. I hate to say it, but it's just what we're at. Bronzong G, a staple in old SP decks. Crobat G, same for retreat costs. Flashbite, just like the current standard Zigzagoon. Unknown Q and Unknown G to help with the different matchups and for retreating. Toxicroak G to actually help also with the LuxChomp matchup. Help knock out those Luxrays for a revenge KO. He's got 90 HP, so he's still in the Garchomp range, but he's a solid attacker. Also helps poison in some matchups where removing giant tanks from the board, like a DialgaCHOMP mirror, actually was pretty useful. Moving on to the trainers, we have 4 Poketurn, 3 Power Spray, 2 SP Radar, and 1 Energy Gain. Now, there's a lot of parts about this that are very interesting, and I really love about this. Poketurn, one of the craziest cards probably printed, along with Cyrus's Conspiracy, in the history of the TCG. But the game did change about a year later when Black and White dropped. Take all cards attached to a Pokemon and put it back into your hand. It just makes your Dialga last that much longer, a whole extra turn, and allowing you to set up another one on the bench makes it so that your opponent has to push through 2 of these. or even just one some games if you're playing it with one Dialga. But Power Spray, moving on. Some versions of DialgaCHOMP even aim to stall out the game longer, but running 3 of them, I think it's a good balance, because having 4 means you're going to obviously run into things early, or a higher chance that it's in your opening hand. I think 3 was the fine number in the mirror. A 4th one always helps, and it really never hurts. But I think for the statistical odds, it's this is where I like to play. SP Radar, fantastic card. Just another choice in the bucket of tools that Cyrus Conspiracy always had. Search your deck for a Pokemon. Put it, what can you ask for? Energy gain. And I'm going to mention Expert Belt right next to it, because these are the 2 most important parts about some of the modern era retro. The low count of energy gain came along because obviously this deck you can see there's a ton of just one-off cards. Cyrus Conspiracy enabled so much for this format, for even decks that honestly didn't run an entire SP engine of Pokemon. Back to this though, Cyrus Conspiracy. So let's say you start your Dialga, turn 1 opening. In this format, you're allowed to use supporters. And let's say, you play your Cyrus, you grab your energy gain, you grab your basic metal, you're good to go. What some people started to learn is that a Dialga G Deafen for 10 damage helps, but a turn 2 Dialga G with Expert Belt and a fully stacked Deafen as well for 30 damage, plus they can't play trainers, starts to add up over the course of a 40-minute game. Considering the format was best of 1 back then, obviously Expert Belt became a risk to some, but in this deck, mixing with a card we'll mention now, the Snowpoint Temple at the bottom, and the special metal energy made it so that your Dialga level X could be something that was barely ever one shot. Hardly would you see a day that happens. When it does, you're almost always prepared for it too. Moving on, so we have the 3 Expert Belt staple card. Like I said earlier with the Power Spray, it's only something that you want to have here and there. 4 copies seems a little rough, but I think some people might prefer that playstyle. It comes down to the player. VS Seeker, honestly, one of my favorite cards ever printed in TCG history. Just a staple. Grab that supporter from your discard pile. In this case, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 individual supporters that are all one-ofs. You need to keep that utility on hand. Pokemon Communication works the same way as in Standard. And Warp Points, obviously same thing as Escape Rope now. Warp Point, one of the fantastic tools for this deck. Your Dialga level X does have a 2 retreat cost, so getting him out of the active to put a Garchomp and then level X that Garchomp for the maximum optimal healing breath was always a fantastic tool. All right, moving on to the supporters. We have Cyrus's Conspiracy coming in at the only supporter with more than 1 copy of it. Obviously, this is the real engine of the deck. This was the SP engine at its core. Very few cards in history are ever printed with this much, I want to say, strength or value that don't come at a cost. And this is... It speaks for itself. Search your deck for a supporter, a card with Team Galactics in its name, and then a basic energy. When half this deck can attack off just those requirements, and you continue to get to boost your consistency or search for any one of these 8 supporters, it's the name of the game. Pokemon Collector, always fantastic. This deck does not run very many copies of it. Not a lot of decks did at in the SP era. I would never have said there would have been 4 in most. 1 to 2, maybe 3, depending on like how heavy. In some of the older DialgaCHOMP lists, I could see that maybe 2 to 3, like I said. But I like just having 1. Again, it becomes a dead card later. Roseanne serves the same purpose, except adds the energy swap. Love it. Bebe's search for anything. This is where, like I said earlier, Azelf was something that you had to specifically search with this card because SP Radar just couldn't. Looker's Investigation. You're obviously messing with your opponent by keeping them out of the game with trainers. This just helps with that, or also is your own permanent hand shuffle. It does two things, and fantastic game mechanics. Bertha's Warmth. In regards to the things that changed over the years, this was a card that was definitely probably one of my favorite, if not my single most favorite addition to all of DialgaCHOMP. This makes it so that your Dialga level X, who is already one of the hardest to one-shot Pokemon in this format, just becomes that much tankier. Nothing made me happier than when I played my webcam games on this with this list to versus Seeker up a Bertha's Warmth, just to hear that sigh from my opponent, knowing that they will not get this boy out of play. Interviewer's Questions, just a fantastic card for the deck. You run 5 different types of energy. Obviously, you have a one-off on the Psychic, but you get mixed into this game where you are sometimes stuck with a very large hand that your opponent will not always have a way to deal with. Interviewer's Questions capitalizes on that, and digging for these special metals or DCEs, always fantastic. Professor Oak's New Theory, sometimes you will get clump, and that's how this format worked. Having a lot of Pokemon in your hand that don't help progress your board state or hand state, sometimes you just do have to reset and shuffle. Aaron's Collection is the only card in this deck that actually helps on recovery. Still fantastic. Grabbing a basic energy and using another Dialga, sometimes you're just left with one basic. We do not run Azelf. You may have one Dialga G and 2 Dialga level X's in the deck. As I mentioned earlier, the only stadium we run in the format, or in this deck, Snowpoint Temple. Now this again, it contributes to basically how large your Dialga G level X can get, adding 20 HP to all of your basic Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. This was, I believe, something that was used only very rarely back then. It makes, obviously, your Dialga G level X go from 120 HP to 140. Then you add an Expert Belt for 160 HP, now doing 20 extra damage, with the ability to Poke-Turn it, Bertha's Warmth, and then not even adding on top of that the Metal Energy special to just make it just that little much more tankier. Avoid the Blaziken level X knockout. You run 3 basic energy, all searchable with Cyrus, Roseanne's, and pick upable by Aaron's Collection. 3 DCE. Now this would have been something that would have blown my mind if you would have told me that this would have ever changed in a DialgaCHOMP or even LuxChomp list, but I wouldn't say that wouldn't happen in that list. 3DC was just a modern revision that for space, and honestly, I love it. I love it. Dialga does not require it in being your primary attacker. It just doesn't make sense to run more copies of it. Garchomp, while fantastic as always, there's nothing wrong with that card. You just don't need to. He doesn't need to be front and center to this show. Warp Energy. So something we mentioned earlier with the Warp Point serves the same function. It gets the Dialga back to the bench for you to level X your Garchomp C, to Healing Breath all of your SP Pokemon, healing them, and resetting anything your opponent has tried to do. And then the 1 Psychic Energy for several attackers. We use that on Crobat and Toxicroak, just in case. You never know what you're going to do. Energy gain comes in clutch. And that is the 60 from Snowpoint. If you guys have any questions or comments below about the list, remember this is not mine. I pulled this from Snowpoint. I love and watch all of his videos. He keeps up to date on a lot of cool formats, but I have played a lot of this list, and maybe he's changed it. Who knows? In the meantime, please check out all of our videos. We're releasing a whole bunch of Lost Origin stuff, GLC, videos almost every day, shorts, you name it. Anyways, guys, have a good one. Thank you. Bye.